Hello everybody, this is the Plastic Commando coming to you today from deep behind enemy lines. Today's video is it's a continuation series on my custom tanks for use in Axis and Allies World War I 1914. And today we'll be looking at the German Empire and specifically the Sturmpanzerwagen A7V. This was the German Empire's design of a heavy tank that saw action late in the war and was produced on the heels of the success that the French and both the British tank designs and implementation of those on the battlefield had been seen. And so the Germans were, really late in the game in terms of fielding, developing first and then fielding a battle tank for World War I. In part, the successes that the Germans had upon their stormtroopers in trying to break enemy lines, stalemates, and the Germans in particular really had not put much emphasis on tanks, but again took notice of the successes of the French and the British, and of course they were able to develop their tank, and the A7V was the result of their efforts. And just a little bit of background on the tank itself. It came into service in March of 1918. And of course continued on up until towards the end of the war in October of 1918. And the tank itself, there were originally, I believe, 100 that were proposed to have been built, but I believe there was only about 20 that actually made production and saw service. It was a fairly large tank. It certainly was a very unique design tank in that it was very tall and very long compared to tanks, so it really made a presence on a battlefield in World War I compared to some of, say for instance, the more light tanks that the French had developed, as well as the low profile of the British Mark IVs, Mark V tanks. And the tank itself, it weighed about 33 tons. It was about over 10 feet high, 10 feet long, and it was a large tank. I mean, it had a crew of 18, one of which was a tank officer. Then, of course, that was followed by, of course, the driver, mechanics, and gunners. So it, again, similar to, for instance, the Italian tank, which I'd talked about as well in my series. I mean, it took quite a few men to get this tank moving and to be able to man all the gun ports as well as the main gun itself. The main gun that was used in this particular tank was a 57 millimeter gun that, if I'm not mistaken, it was modeled after, or it may have actually been a Belgian gun, but it was a fairly reliable gun that was used in the tank itself. And of course the tank in addition had other gun ports that were manned with machine guns on all sides, so it was a fairly impressive tank on the battlefield in terms of armament, but it was comparable in speed as a four-cylinder engine, just like a lot of the other tanks, but it did have its problems though of once it was fielded on the battlefield and put into action. I mean, there's reports it would easily be bogged down in trenches, uneven terrain, muddy terrain for that matter. And again, with the high profile, it was prone to, depending on, I guess, the level of the ground, it was prone to tip over and would get stuck. So like again, a lot of the other tanks that was seen in service in World War I, it certainly had its problems of maneuverability on the battlefield. But again, it did make a presence. again, toward the end of the war. The first combat action occurred in March of 18. And again, like a lot of other powers at the time, it suffered mechanical breakdowns, but it did engage the British initially, and again on several occasions. Actually the first tank on tank action, if you will, was against the British Mark IVs. That the British actually had female versions of their tank with machine guns. And I believe there was perhaps one tank that for the British that did have a main gun armament cannon. And the initial tank-on-tank battle basically ended in a draw. I mean, there were breakdowns and the casualties on both sides. But you know, in thinking about some of the great tank battles, for example, of World War II, it was by no means a giant tank battle, but it was accompanied by infantry. And again, made the record of being the first tank-on-tank action in World War I. The tank itself, it probably at best was a minor success, if that, in World War I. Again, there was only 20 that was actually fielded, but it did have its problems. The use of tanks, though, by the German Empire really, for the most part, was actually captures of the British version of the Mark V and Mark IV tanks. And most of the tanks that Germany did use in World War I were tanks that were retrieved off the battlefield from Britain. Having said that, given obviously the use of tanks and need for tanks in this game, I'm going to be fielding two different versions of tanks for Germany to represent again the historical accuracy of the use of tanks by the Germans, and again primarily most of the tanks that were captured on the battlefield by Britain. That's what we've got before us here, and I'll just show you briefly. Again, this is the out-of-box version tank. I'm coming around here. It's been painted and weathered, similar to the German gray pattern, which I've used for all of my infantry. Of course, you can see some of the, perhaps some of the detail of the weathering from the Army Painter soft tone shade, and it's been sealed, of course, with matte varnish and decaled with decals from I-94 Enterprises. I think these turned out really good. And this particular tank version of it's the A7V, of course, can be found on Historical Board Gaming's shapeways.com website. These are tanks that are available for purchase. They are white, versatile plastic. Again, they take paint really well, and they paint up really nice. Good representation of the tank. Of course, you can see some of the detail from the top. You can see the main gun poking out there in the front. That's of course the 57 millimeter gun we talked about. We've got a good view of the underside belly, the tracks. The only thing, though, it's not particularly represented on this tank itself, just because of the maybe some of the limited design is of course the gun ports and any machine guns that would have protruded out. But really, obviously, just having knowledge of that, I think is sufficient, because what I've found with some of the fragile pieces that you can get on game tanks from Shapeways, if you're not careful, some of those are easily, with gameplay and handling, easily to break off. So overall, I think this is a really good sculpt. And if you're looking to add some variation to your game, I certainly encourage you to try out Doug's website on Shapeways. And these come, I believe, they come in a pack of 5, which is what I've got. And again, just primed these, painted them up in my gunship gray that I use for Germany, stained, weathered, and decaled. And I've got a few pictures here of the tanks themselves that were utilized in battle, some representations, and of course black and white one of the Mark V tank, I believe, that was on the battlefield. And we'll kind of go through these here just so you can see a few of the pictures and representations of the tanks. And I've tried to pattern, of course, the decals off of some of the images that I've seen from not only historical reference photos, but some that maybe have been representations of the tanks itself. So I actually like the dual use of the German cross on the battle tanks. It unlike any of the other tanks that I've got in the game, these are highly visible on the game board, which of course is what I was going for as well. So, that's it. I just wanted to again share the German tanks, which I'll be putting into gameplay. It's again a cool sculpt. Looks good on the game board. Also, in conjunction with the use of the out-of-box German tanks that, again, in this case, are represented by the capture of British tanks that were highly used on the battlefield during World War I by the Germans. So we've got a good representation, cross-reference of various tanks here. So, all right, guys, I appreciate it. Look forward to interacting with any of you all. I'm curious, again, if some of you guys are using some of these tanks, maybe trying to vary on your game board. If so, let me know. And again, if you've not subscribed, I encourage you to do so. We'll have a couple more videos out just to complete the series coming up. And I hope you guys have a great day. This is the Plastic Commando, over and out.